Welcome to our podcast. This is another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego at KCBQ with video production provided by MaxLux Media with your host, myself, Steve Wire. This podcast is dedicated to keeping you informed and engaged with the latest news and trending events in the San Diego region. Join us on a weekly exploration as we sit down with prominent political figures, insightful analysts, industry professionals, and influential community members. So today we bring into the studio Donnie Dee. Donnie is the president and CEO of the San Diego Rescue Mission. He is somebody who we're really excited to have on as we continue this series that we're doing on homelessness in San Diego. He has 27 years of experience at the Fellowship of Christian Athletes, including roles of the director of Tom Landry Associates and COO. He also has a sports background, which I found interesting. He played football and basketball in high school and was drafted by the NFL's Indianapolis Colts, playing for 2 years before transitioning to FCA career in 1990. Donnie, I'll point out, is very driven by his faith and a passion for helping others and inspiring a culture of excellence and honor in his work. Thanks so much for coming on to the show. Appreciate having you. One of the first questions I wanted to ask you is, what was it like playing for the Colts? I mean, like that had to be, that's kind of cool.
Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. It's a lot of fun to be able to tell our story and to talk about what we're doing in San Diego. But with respect to my background as an athlete, it was a dream come true. I came from a sports family. My father was a professional basketball player, coincidentally played for the Indiana Pacers, the same city as the Indianapolis Colts are in, and he won a gold medal in the 1968 Olympics playing basketball. And so growing up in my household, sports was a big deal. Parents didn't put a lot of pressure on me to play sports or to be like my father, but I put a lot of pressure on myself. And so I just wanted to follow in his footsteps and had the opportunity to play college football at the University of Tulsa on a scholarship, and then got drafted by the Colts. And going back to the same city that my dad got his NBA career, actually it was the ABA then, got his career started, and it was really a dream come true, I think. And like every kid, when you're playing football as a fifth grader, you dream someday about playing on the biggest stage there is, which is the National Football League. And so it was a real dream come true for me.
Sure. What was sort of the transition there like? I mean, you played in the NFL and then transitioned to what you do now, and the service work that you've been involved in terms of helping people, philanthropic work. Like, what was that transition like for you?
Well, I think from an athletic standpoint, it was tough. It was difficult. I think anytime you do something for that many years of your life, to transition to something else is going to be difficult. I remember my first year out of football, my body was just sensing the fall season and that I should be getting in shape and I should be lifting. And am I ready for conditioning? Am I ready for the season before you show up and you go through training camp? And the first year I didn't have to do that. It was really kind of awkward, kind of weird. And so I got through that. I knew that I wanted to spend my life making a difference, that I had been blessed, I had been given a lot, and that I wanted to create opportunities for other people to be blessed and to be given a lot. And so I went to work for an organization that had a huge impact on me, which was the Fellowship of Christian Athletes. And I always felt like I was giving back, like I was saying thank you every day I served them for 27 years because of the impact that organization had on my life.
Sure. So just a little bit of background. So the San Diego Rescue Mission was founded in 1955. It's been an institution that's been working against homelessness in San Diego County over the years and has evolved in expanding its services, addressing homelessness, abuse, poverty, and addiction. And it actually, again, it traces its roots to the 1950s, and then it evolved as the City Rescue Mission, and then now it's the San Diego Rescue Mission. And there's been sort of different transitional periods there. But can you tell us a little bit about just like in terms of the background of the organization and how it got to where it is now, and like your involvement, like sort of like what you do?
Yeah, I love that question because it's very much the answer to those questions is really who we are and what we've become today. We started as a soup kitchen almost 70 years ago, and most rescue missions around the country started as soup kitchens where you're serving breakfast, lunch, and dinner to the public. They line up out front, and most gospel-centered rescue missions, you have to hear the message from a guest preacher or guest speaker, and then they feed you. It's called soup and salvation is sort of the terms that they used to use. I don't know when it was, but because I wasn't there then, but probably 15, 20 years after they launched, they realized they were serving the same people every day, and there was something more systemic that was going on here, maybe something more clinical, more spiritual, more therapeutic. And so they grew into a a residential shelter where we were actually doing rehabilitation. And I would tell you that here we are 70 years later, from the two business guys that got us started in the 1950s as a soup kitchen, we've really grown into a 360-bed rehabilitation center. We believe that homelessness is a heart issue, and until we address the issues that are going on in a man or woman's heart who finds themselves homeless, we're not changing anything. Once we can address the issues of their heart, whether that's physical violence, whether that's domestic violence, whether that's sexual abuse, whether that's early childhood trauma, early death that they've had to experience, whatever the situation may be, we have to address that before we start addressing their need for housing, their addiction, their mental health, and all of the other things that go along with people living on the streets.
Sure, and I want to get to the unique approach that you guys adopt when it comes to dealing with the unhoused, but I also wanted to ask you, given the long history of the organization, you guys have seen a lot, like organizationally, in terms of the way that homelessness has evolved in San Diego specifically. What can you tell us about that in terms of like how has sort of the problem like evolved historically in San Diego since the time of the founding of the rescue mission? And the second part of that question is how has your organization like reacted accordingly?
Well, that's a workshop. The answer to that question is a workshop. It's complicated. I mean, I think as the population has grown, so has the different segments of population, from the super wealthy to the extremely poor. And I think that's one factor. I think the cost to live here has made it more difficult for people to survive. I think the lack of affordable housing. I think the legalization of drugs. I think the limited police enforcement. I think the approach of housing first. I mean, there are just so many factors that have led to where we are today. And I would tell you that where we are today isn't just a homeless problem. It's a humanitarian crisis. And as the mayor in New York said to the media yesterday, that look, if we don't do something different, we're going to lose this city. And he was speaking of New York, and I think that's true for San Diego, that this beautiful place that we call home, America's finest city, that we are normalizing people sleeping on the sidewalks, that we're normalizing tent encampments, that we're normalizing people experiencing homelessness and just kind of bouncing around from bridge to bridge, from riverbed to riverbed. And we have got to do some things differently. And we've grown into that. Because we don't take any government funding, we get to focus on outcomes. We get to focus on results. We're not focused on compliance or service contracts. And we're going to do what needs to be done to change the state of homelessness, which is very much a part of our plan for the future.
Yeah, and I want to talk about what you guys do differently as compared to other organizations, because as you mentioned, you don't take government funding. You guys have sort of a unique approach, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to do this interview, is because I'd heard about sort of the uniqueness of the organization of the San Diego Rescue Mission and like what you guys do differently. But one question I have is, and this is something I've asked the last couple of episodes that we've done on homelessness, is, the numbers are out for this year. The Regional Task Force on Homelessness released a report just a couple of months back. Homelessness has increased in San Diego County by about 14% since last year. And then another stat I wanted to mention is the services being provided, so the housing services being provided are outpaced by the demand for services. So about around 15,000 plus roughly people are seeking services currently, while only about 11 to 12,000 people are actually housed in 2022. So the demand for services outpacing existing housing, and at the same time we have this 14% increase in homelessness since last year. So what is sort of your reaction to these numbers? Like, do you find this like surprising, like disappointing? Like, where does this fall in your?
Well, I think that those statistics are what we rely on. There is a federally mandated way that we capture and count people experiencing homelessness. It's called the point-in-time count. I don't think it's too sophisticated. It's very labor intensive because it takes a couple thousand volunteers walking around the county physically counting and capturing that in a handheld. That's how we count the number of people living on the streets. And I would tell you that number is overwhelmingly low. That you ask anybody that's in this space and they would tell you that we're closer to 30,000 people living on the streets than we are 15,000. And that should alarm you. That should alarm us. That should alarm any San Diegan that we are talking about 15,000 when we should really be talking about 30,000. Now, the good news is that it's 30,000 people We're not talking about millions of people, and that we got to do a couple of things better to answer your question. One is we got to build a system. We got to build a better system by which somebody goes from living on the sidewalks to getting into a place where they can get immediate care and their current crisis is resolved, and then you help them put their life back together again. Anything short of that, and all we're doing is relocating people. All we're doing is moving people around. I think the second thing it's going to take is police enforcement. Now, look, I don't want anybody to go to jail. I don't want anybody that's homeless at the lowest place in their life to have to spend one night in jail. However, this is a society. We all live here, and you can't sleep on the streets. It's not good for you. It's not healthy. It's not safe. Your life decreases by 10 years if you are a male living on the streets, considered to be chronically homeless. If you are a female living on the streets, considered to be chronically homeless, which is somebody who's been homeless for more than 18 months, your life expectancy decreases by 20 years. The amount of trash, the amount of feces, the disease, the sickness, the burglaries, the robberies, the crime we've got plenty of data on that, and there's plenty of research on that we got to start doing some things differently. And so I would tell you, we got to build a better system, and we have to have police enforcement. You cannot live on the streets. You cannot resist services. Let me put it that way. If you're sleeping on the streets, then we got to get you inside, whether you want to be there or not, because you don't get to sleep outside in San Diego.
Sure. So with that being said, this idea that, we shouldn't be letting people, camp out on the streets, et cetera. What's your reaction to, so San Diego Mayor Todd Gloria and the San Diego City Council recently had a homeless encampment ban put into place in San Diego, which they've started enforcing to the extent that I think so far it's mostly in Balboa Park, but they're beginning to enforce it across the city. Basically, they're not letting people sleep on the streets. They're actually saying, you have to get services, you have to get into shelter. And we had some people on the podcast last week who basically countered that with that this is sort of a Band-Aid on the problem, that this doesn't really do anything to actually address homelessness, and it's more of just moving people around. Like, what's your take in terms of what a homeless encampment ban actually does, or is there a better approach that should be taken?
I think Mayor Gloria's got a tough job, and I think that he has changed some of his political views on this since the day he got elected. I think he is stronger on this issue, and I applaud the encampment ban. I applaud that. I think that's a good step in the right direction. But until we have enough beds for people to go to, that they're moving off of the bridges and the riverbeds and the tent encampments, until we actually have enough beds, they're not arresting people that are sleeping on the streets. They're just moving them to another street. They're just telling them you have to go. And so they pack up their stuff and then they go find another place until that new place that they're camping out in becomes an area that the city wants to sweep. And to me, that's a short-term fix. I think we as a society and as a community have to figure out how to add more beds to the system so that every single person that the police or a city official or a service provider engages who is living on the streets has a place to go. And if you choose not to go to that place, then you will spend the night in jail.
So so in principle, you agree with this policy in terms of the idea that people should not be left on the streets, that people should be moved somewhere. But in practice, you sort of characterizing this as a short-term fix in terms of it doesn't actually address any of the root causes of homelessness. This is more of just moving people around.
Well, I think we have seen, because our building is downtown, I think we have seen some bridges where the police have shown up with city officials and they have moved people along. But I'm just telling you, those people didn't get into housing and those people didn't go to jail. So where did they go? Well, they went to another bridge. They went to another area where they wouldn't be bothered. And to me, that's not ultimately changing the state of homelessness. And what I want to be a part of is a community of people that are actually working together. We've eliminated redundancy. We've created alignment. And on behalf of the person experiencing homelessness, we got our act together so that we can actually help you. Whatever it is that you are trying to overcome, we can actually help you, because you do not get to resist services. If you resist services, then because of the encampment ban, you're going to jail. And I think that will be a wake-up call. I don't think anybody that's sleeping on the streets wants to go to jail. They don't want the hassle of having their stuff dropped off at a warehouse. They don't want the hassle of having to post bail. They don't want the hassle of having to spend the night in county jail. That has got to be a part of the solution, or all we're ultimately doing is just moving people around while this issue continues to grow.
Sure. There's an interesting sort of philosophical debate going on here and the people I've interviewed in terms of there's this perspective that if you have the services, if you have the funding for the services, people will accept them regardless of whatever else. And then there's another perspective that I've encountered, which is that a lot of people refuse services, that when you actually go out on the streets, when you actually deal with people who are unhoused, a lot of them, for whatever reason, maybe are content, living unsheltered, refusing services, or perhaps, there's conditions of mental health or substance abuse where they're incapable of recognizing that they need services. Where do you fall in terms of that debate, in terms of this idea that, if you just provide this funding, provide the services, people will accept them? Or is there like a deeper, more structural problem like mental health, like substance abuse that has to be addressed before we can even get to the point of housing people?
It's a complicated question. It's a complicated answer. I don't think there's a one size fits all. You're dealing with human beings that have all been through different circumstances and different situations. I think that the answer to the question, though, begins with engagement. We have to engage people living on the streets differently. The reason the majority of the people on the streets are resisting services isn't because they want to sleep on the streets. It's because they've had a bad shelter experience. It's because they've tried that and it didn't work. And I think we got to do some things differently. We are so decentralized in our approach on homelessness that they get lost. They're falling through the cracks of all the services that are being provided because they're not coordinated. Because they're not connected. And I know that sounds, like hyperbole as I'm talking through that here on your show, but the reality of it is that you ask anybody that's living on the streets, they know where the services are. They're more skilled and more educated and more resourceful than we realize. And they know how to eat, they know how to take care of themselves, and they know where the shelters are. But they've had a bad experience, and because they've had a bad experience, stuff stolen, gotten beaten up, got kicked out, got dropped off someplace. This sleeping here on the sidewalks is something I can control, and it's something that I'm in charge of. And so I'm not gonna turn my life over to an organization or to an individual unless I trust you. And I think trust and how we build trust with people living on the streets is a critical component to us getting to the place where we have less people living on the streets in the future than we do today.
Sure. I read a report recently, and I can't remember the source, but basically, to the extent that I think around 40% of homeless in San Diego suffers from some kind of like mental illness, and it's sort of this I feel like it's sort of this chicken or egg debate of do people turn to substance abuse? Do people become mentally ill? Living on the street, or is that sort of what drives them to homelessness? And sort of this debate over which problem do you address first? Do you address the housing? Do you get them in shelter? Or is that only sort of a Band-Aid? Does that person actually end up back on the street because of those underlying conditions? Where do you fall in terms of that debate, in terms of which chicken or egg? What do you address first? Do you address the conditions that person deals with, or do you get them in housing and then deal with it later?
I read an article that suggested that every human being suffers from some level of mental illness, right? If you're human and you're insecure or you have fears or you have doubts, that's some level of mental illness. And I'm not sure I totally agreed with the article, but I think 40% is high. I don't think there are 40% of people experiencing homelessness that are severely mentally ill. It's the severely mentally ill that I think need to be in a hospital, that need to be under the care and the direction of a doctor. That, from my sense is, that's about 15 to 20%. What we see as we're driving around town are mostly the severely mentally ill because they're the ones standing on the street corners yelling at themselves or yelling at the cars.
It's more visible.
It's more visible. Yeah. And I think that's something that the government, the county, who's in charge of our behavioral health here in San Diego, I think that's something they need to be strategizing for, and they need to be building hospitals. They need to be building facilities so that we can get those people inside, get them medicated, and get them cared for, and see if we can't help them get their life back.
You're talking about long-term.
I'm talking about long-term facilities. Yeah. I think the majority of the rest of the people that are experiencing homelessness, it's about how we engage them. It's about building a relationship with trust. It's about walking them through a system of care from sleeping on the streets, homeless, to living again and being healthy. And that's a heavy lift. It's not going to happen overnight. You don't scale this in a couple of months. But we got to change the way we approach people living on the streets, or this situation is going to continue to get worse.
One thing that's been brought up by a couple of activists who've come into our show is this idea that to some level we can't just sort of like leave this decision about whether to get treatment to the homeless themselves, that there's a place for involuntary care. There's efforts right now in California. There's the Care Court program that was recently signed into law by Governor Newsom. And there's also efforts to change the LPS law about conservatorships. Do you have any opinion about that in terms of like whether conservatorships, whether involuntary care is an effective mechanism for those severe cases of people who are severely mentally ill, severely addicted, maybe incapable of recognizing that they need help? Like, is there a place for that in your view in terms of addressing the homelessness issue, or is that sort of a...
No, I think there's a place for that. There's people that are living on the streets that are a danger to themselves and a danger to other people. And we need to step in. Just like we would step in if we thought that a child was in danger in the home that they were living in because their parents were either physically abusive or they weren't taking care of them or there was neglect. We would step in as a society. We have to step in here. We have to do the same thing, is that if we feel like someone is a danger to themselves, that they're going to kill themselves, they're going to run out in front of a car, that they're a danger to somebody else, then we have to step in. And so I am in favor of that. I wish it was more spiritual. I wish that we were addressing the issues of the heart. I wish we were talking more about faith and God. And I wish that we could communicate to, those kind of people, and have a spiritual component to it. But that's not going to be the case because this is a government-led program or initiative. But I am in favor of it. And I think that ultimately that will help some people live longer because we've taken the danger of themselves out of the way.
Sure. You mentioned the role of faith in terms of dealing with people who suffer from homelessness. Since you are a man of faith, and since that is obviously a big part of what you do at the San Diego Rescue Mission as the leader, I want to ask you sort of the role that plays in terms of your personal and professional approach to homelessness and what you've seen from that.
Well, you can't impart what you don't possess. And I would just tell you that faith has changed my life, that I'm the oldest of four from a broken home. My father was an alcoholic. We had been evicted from a few places growing up because my father's drinking was more important than taking care of the needs of the family. And so I've seen this firsthand. And I know how quickly somebody can end up on the streets. Not that I've ever been homeless, because I haven't, but I have certainly seen how addiction, I've seen how the lack of responsibility, I've seen how those diseases can impact a family. And I started my faith journey as a freshman at the University of Tulsa, and it radically changed my life. It has established convictions and discipline. God's word has guided me. And I feel like that for people living on the streets, that the very first thing they need to understand is that there's a God that loves them and has not given up on them. People living on the street deal with a tremendous amount of shame. And I'm not talking about the severely mentally ill that aren't quite sure what they're thinking. I'm talking about the majority of the people living on the streets that deal with a tremendous amount of shame. It's hard to get them to look you in the eyes. They're dealing with so much shame, they can't even stand and look you eyeball to eyeball because they're embarrassed. They're ashamed. They're humiliated. Look at my life. I mean, look what I've done. Guy told me at the mission a couple of years ago that the very first thought that he has every morning when he gets up is, look what you've done to your life. So imagine starting your day every day with just look what you've done with your life and then trying to do something positive from there. And that's just the impact of shame. And I think that God has a way of taking away shame, that if there's still breath in your lungs, that he's got a plan for you. He's got a purpose for you. What would it look like if you got healthy, you overcame your stuff, whether it was addiction or sexual abuse or whether it was early childhood trauma, whatever your stuff was? What if you overcame that and then he was able to use you to help somebody else overcome their stuff? That's powerful. We tend to listen to people who have walked a similar path as we've walked. And I think that people who have overcome homelessness become a powerful force, an army, to help the rest of the people trying to overcome that because they don't think they can change. Shame is a vicious. It's as vicious as alcoholism, and it'll shut you down in a minute. And I just feel like the only thing that can really combat shame is the love of God.
Do you feel like, and can you sort of explain how if your faith sort of impacts like the specific work that you do day to day and what that looks like?
Yeah, so we have we look at at what we do programmatically in really two big buckets. What are we going to do to get people off the streets immediately? And then what are we going to do to get people off the streets permanently? How we get people off the streets immediately is through our shower trailer unit. We have 2 shower trailers, 4 stall shower trailers that are driven around in pickup trucks donated by Bill and Susan Hohen. And we have one that's deployed in South County and one that's deployed in North County. And that's how we primarily engage. I told you how important it was to engage the right way. That's how we primarily engage people living on the streets. From there, we give them a shower. I heard it said this way, that when people start feeling like people again, they start acting like people again. And there's no better way to engage somebody living on the streets than to offer them a free shower. Game changer. From there, once we start to have this relationship of trust, it's, where are you going? Where are you spending the night? Let us get you into one of our navigation centers. We currently have one downtown, a 60-bed shelter for women and children, and we have a 50-bed shelter in Oceanside for men, women, and children. We have another one that's under construction in National City. It's a 162-bed facility, and that's how we will primarily get people into our shelters and get them off the streets immediately. The answer to the question that you asked me, it seems like a couple minutes ago now, was how do we use faith? Well, we use faith in our long-term program. That's how we get people off the streets permanently. My 360-bed facility downtown, which was the old Harborview Hospital, we do rehab there. They live with us for 12 months. We call them students. The program is actually called Mission Academy. They go through trimesters. First trimester is wellness. Second trimester is education. Third trimester is job placement and housing. And as a part of that program, they got to get up and go to class every day. They got to work their on-site job every day. There's no TVs in the room. There's no cable. This is about you getting well. And we have devotions in the morning that are mandatory. You have to go. You don't have to bring your Bible. You don't have to raise your hands. You don't have to act like you're interested, but you have to be there. And we're going to teach you God's word. We're not going to beat you over the head with a Bible. We're not going to preach hellfire and brimstone. You're not going to hear that you're a sinner every day, but we're going to teach God's word and the principles of God's word. And then on Sunday nights and Wednesday nights, we have churches, about 100 churches that volunteer their leadership to come in and to give a message and to lead worship. And it's through those 2 primary components, along with some Bible classes, that we introduce faith to people who are in our long-term rehabilitation program.
Sure. So I'm curious, like we've kind of touched on it already, but like as an organization, because one of the reasons I did this interview is because I'd heard about sort of the unique success that you guys have seen, the results that you guys have produced. So can you talk about like the San Diego Rescue Mission, like you've touched on, the navigational center and some of the specific things that you guys do to get people off the streets, short-term and long-term. But can you talk more about the unique approach that you guys adopt and sort of how you've seen the results that you've seen and what that looks like?
Everything we do is built around rehabilitation, and we feel like that is the key to homelessness. That is the key to changing the state of homelessness, is rehabilitation. That homelessness is not just a housing issue. It's not just a drug and alcohol issue. It's not just a trauma issue. This is about addressing the issues of the heart. Homelessness is a heart issue, and if we can get in there through therapy, through a faith-based approach, if we can get in there and begin to, through case management, and address the issues of the heart, we can ultimately see your life changed. So the people that come into our long-term program, stay with us 12 months, 60% that start that program graduate from that program. And if they graduate from the San Diego Rescue Mission, they're sober, they're housed, they're working again, and they're reconnected with their family and a church. That's how we measure success. And 60%, 6 out of 10 people that walk into now not everybody gets into the long-term program. There's an intake process. But of the 300 beds that we have, and we're full, 60% of them will graduate. Those that don't graduate, 87% leave in the first 60 days. And they leave in the first 60 days either because they relapse or we got too many rules. Because we have a lot of rules. You don't get to sleep all day. You have to work a job in the kitchen, at the warehouse, and facilities, and you have to go to classes. Boundaries classes, parenting classes, early childhood trauma classes, drug and alcohol classes, Bible classes, resume building classes, how to dress for success classes, yoga classes. If you need your GED, you can get that at the San Diego Rescue Mission. Wow. We have everything you need to get well, but you got to get up and work the program. And if you get up and work the program, then you'll be successful. And 60% of the people that start our program graduate and have a changed life.
Do you feel like this rehabilitation approach that you guys adopt in terms of thinking, like long-term solution to homelessness has to do with rehabilitation, that looks like classes, that looks like getting people at work. Do you feel like that approach is being adopted at a governmental level in San Diego County? And if not, like, what can be done about that?
Well, it's not, because where the money flows is where the programs are. And the money flows into California around an initiative called Housing First. 100% of the dollars that are used for homelessness that are given by HUD federally, the state, Sacramento, or locally have to be used for Housing First initiatives, which just says this, that the government will fund you as an organization so long as your priority is to get them off the streets. You can't require them to stop using. You can't require them to get a job. You can't require them to see a case manager. This is about getting them into housing and off the streets. And anybody that looks at that logically or in a sensible way would say, you're not addressing the issue. Mm-hmm. Well, duh. And that is a part of the reason, and I think the biggest reason, government funding is the elephant in the room. I've said it 100 times. That's the biggest reason why our homeless problem has exploded, is because we're putting people into apartments. We're putting people into housing with rent subsidies. And when the rent subsidy runs out, where do you think they end up again? Streets. Right back on the streets. Why? Because we didn't address
what made them homeless to begin with.
That is fundamental for us. And that's what we do at the San Diego Rescue Mission, is if you trust us and you put in the work, we guarantee you we'll get you off the streets permanently. Sure. But we got to get in there through case management and through therapy and through our classes and address what's going on in your life.
Yeah, I mean, because I was going to ask you about Housing First, like sort of your thoughts on that. And, something we brought up last week is, it's been about over $2 billion that's been spent on homelessness in the last few years, according to this San Diego Union Tribune. So while during that time, obviously homelessness has increased. So there's this sort of disconnect of, funding being spent. People always talk about, we need funding for this, we need funding for that. It seems like the funding's been there. Homelessness has gotten worse. And a lot of people say that Housing First as a policy, as a state policy, and in San Diego locally has failed us. That we're continuing to see homelessness rates rise even as we invest more and more money into housing. And it seems like nothing's getting done. It seems like you would be in the camp of those who say, this policy has failed us. It's time for a new approach.
100%. And I could share plenty of stats, but the reality of it is that as we drive around our counties, we drive around our cities, we know that homelessness is on the rise, that what we're doing is not working. And I would say that's a complicated answer, that there's a number of reasons that contribute to that, but primarily it's because of approach, that Housing First is the wrong approach, that money could be better spent if we would adopt more rehabilitative programs, if we would take the time to really address their family needs and their social needs and their mental needs and their psychological needs. If we'd spend more time really getting into a person's life and walking them out of their darkness, I believe we can change the state of homelessness in San Diego.
Sure. In terms of your organization and your specific approach, I mean, it seems like you have both sort of that short-term relief available for people, and then you have the long-term relief available. So can you kind of talk about how that combination works? Like you guys, you talked about the Oceanside Navigation Center, and then you have one downtown too, right? Mm-hmm. Can you tell us more about that and how these programs work and like how it's combined sort of the short term with the long term?
Yeah, I appreciate you asking that, because that's really the system that we're building. We can't control all of the service providers out there, and we can't control how the government spends its funding, but what we can do is control what we do as an organization. And we're going to get people off the streets. We want to be judged when it's all said and done and we move on to do other things, or we all move on to retire. We want our time at the San Diego Rescue Mission to be evaluated by how many people did you get off the streets? Because that's really what we should all be working towards. It's not about accommodating. There's a difference between meeting the needs of the homeless and addressing the needs of the homeless. And I would tell you most of what we're doing, that $2 billion that we spent, most of that is meeting the needs of the homeless, not addressing the needs of the homeless. And we have got to spend more time and more money addressing the needs of the homeless, or we're never going to get our arms around that. I told you early on that there were two things that needed to happen. Now, these are big projects, big initiatives, but they are things we're working towards. We got to build a better system, and we need police enforcement. So we're building a system. We're going to build a system that we can control. And that is through our shower trailers. We're going to engage you and give you an opportunity to get clean and to meet some of our staff and to build a relationship. From there, we want to offer you a place to stay in one of our navigation centers. We have a 60-bed facility downtown. We have a 50-bed facility in Oceanside. We have a 162-bed facility that will be open early next year in National City. And we have a third that will open in the next 18 months or so out in East County. We have not identified a site yet. We're just talking to elected officials about it right now. And it'll be through these 4 navigation centers, the one downtown and the 3 in remote locations, that we will get people off the streets and triage their situation. Those are 30-bed, 30-day shelters. You can stay there for up to 30 days. You know that when you do intake, that you can stay here for up to 30 days. And it'll be there as you see a case manager that we figure out where you go next. A majority of them are going to end up downtown, and they're going to start their rehabilitation program. But some may need to go to detox. Some may be severely mentally ill, and you need to go to some type of a mental health facility. Some may need to go to a skilled nursing facility, or you get reconnected with your family. We got to have a place to do triage. You got to have a place to really evaluate and assess somebody's needs so that we can prescribe the right program for them to change their life. That's the system that we're building. And we believe that once it's built out, we can get about 4,000 people off the streets on an annual basis through our navigation centers.
That's a lot. And
of the 4,000, we believe we can end their homelessness for about 700 or 800 as we walk them through a 12-month program.
Sure. I mean, the 60% graduation rate that's pretty high in my estimation.
We're pretty proud of that.
And I'm wondering, like, in terms of that rate, I mean, because you talked about like the fact that homeless people deal with an inordinate amount of shame, and they deal with a huge sort of burden, sort of in terms of like the self-perception and just the sort of basic human dignity and perception of self.
That's right.
On a daily basis. So talk about, like, is it the faith element? Like, you guys have a lot of rules, as you talked about, for your rehabilitation. Is it the faith element? Is it something specific that you guys do? Like, what do you think contributes to that success rate in terms of people who like enter the 12-month program that end up back with housing, end up back with work, back with family?
Yeah, I think it's a number of things, but I think it's primarily our staff. You need to come to one of our graduations. We have our next graduation on November 4th. We have 50 people that have completed the 12-month program of the San Diego Rescue Mission, who have been with us for the last 10 or 12 months, and they will graduate on November 4th. They'll walk across the stage in cap and gown, and we will announce to the community that these 50 have completed the program of the San Diego Rescue Mission. They're sober, they're housed, they're working again, reconnected with their family and church. You got to come to that. We allow one man and one woman to speak on behalf of the class to the audience of about 500 or 600. And we do that every graduation. It's the highlight, man. It's the highlight because they share a little bit about, man, let me tell you where I was at before I came here. And it's just some crazy stories. And then they put in the work, and they're different today. So much so that they're standing on stage sharing with 600 or 700 people. And what comes up over and over again is, thank you, staff. Thank you, staff. Thanks for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Thanks for encouraging me not to leave. Thanks for extending grace when I made a mistake. Thanks for teaching me boundaries. Thanks for showing me that you cared. Thanks for showing me that there is a world out there that really does care about me. And I think that, along with the classes, the clinical, the therapeutic, the spiritual, just the basic meeting their needs every day of a safe place to sleep, a shower, and 3 meals. And the structure allows them to take the step forward so they can ultimately change their life. But I would say it's primarily our staff and their heart to really help people who are at their lowest place in life.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I've done interviews on this show with political leaders, with different activists, and there's debates on housing. We talk about mental health, we talk about substance abuse, but a lot of it comes down to people talk about the need for more funding, more housing, like essentially like throwing money at the problem. And it seems like your approach is like very different. Like you take a step back and say, we're not gonna like make this about money. We're gonna like really look at people's hearts, and we're really gonna get to people on a very spiritual level. And I'm curious, like, can you share, you don't have to name any names or anything, but can you share sort of any specific stories of how you've seen this play out successfully?
Yeah, I think it's a relationship game. I think we need money. I think we need staff. I think we need facilities. We need all of those things that any other organization or program needs. But at the end of the day, this is about relationships, just like everything else in life. When you had a relationship with, Mayor John Franklin, and that connected you to me, and here we are now, starting our own relationship. And I think that life is that way, that all the good things about life really come out of relationships. And so we've built a program around high relational experience at the San Diego Rescue Mission, that you're not alone, that we're going to help you figure this thing out. My first 2 weeks on staff was culture shock. I went from working with coaches and athletes, highly disciplined, motivated, tell them to run through a wall, they run through a wall, to broken, can't even look you in the eye, just desperate, not even sure how to take a step. And although some of the organizational and leadership skills transfer, the type of person and the populations I was working with completely different. So I asked a guy who was working for us, tell me your story. And he was working in facilities, and he said that he was living a fairly normal life, and his wife had gotten murdered, which I can't even imagine that, but she'd gotten murdered, and so he started drinking. The next thing you know, drinking really began to not only soothe him and comfort him, but it began to be a problem in his life. Lost his job, lost his house, lost everything, ended up on the streets drinking alcohol. Someone recommended that he get into the San Diego Rescue Mission. This is 20 years ago. He gets into the San Diego Rescue Mission. He goes through our program, and he said he's been sober about 17 years or something like that. And so I said to him, how have you done it? How have you stayed sober all these years with something that was actually trying to destroy your life? And I was looking for an ABC, a 1, 2, 3. Give me the quick fix, because you did it, and I want to go over and tell everybody in our building this is how you do it. And he put his hands together like he was praying, and he looked up at the ceiling, and he just went, God. Mm-hmm. It was God. And it's God every day that by his grace and his strength that I'm able to say no to alcohol, because I think he realized this is a daily battle for him, and he could slip quickly. But he's been sober now, 17 to 20 years, and he would tell you it's because of his faith. It's because he said yes to something that now that is actually controlling his life and guiding his life. Now he can say no to the things that are trying to destroy his life. That is fundamental, man.
Do you feel like that's kind of fundamental to your approach in terms, as an organization, in terms of like sort of replacing whatever it is that led that person to be homeless, whether it's a substance abuse, whether it's trauma, whether it's something in their past, and replacing that with a better reason to live a productive life? Is that sort of part of the approach in terms of like motivating that person to have a reason to something better than what they're currently doing?
Yeah, I like the way you said that. I think it's God's plan for all of our lives, that he is better, that he's better than the things that we try to fill our lives with to be satisfied and to be happy, that don't sustain us, that leave us all at a place where we go, well, that really didn't last as long as I thought it would last, whether it's money or purchases or relationships. That I think God's trying to tell us that he's better. And you don't have to chase those things for enjoyment or for happiness, that he will give you all those things, but it only comes out of a relationship with him. To me, that's not just a homeless strategy. That's a human strategy. We just happen to be seeing it highlighted at the San Diego Rescue Mission because we're dealing with people who are actually at the bottom of life.
Sure. From a kind of bird's eye view, when you look at homelessness in San Diego as a region, as a county, obviously the problem is getting worse all the time. I mean, do you feel like at a sort of, again, the approach level, you think that our political leaders, and I'm not asking you to take a side, but do you feel like our political leaders, as it stands now, sort of have at least the right approach, the right mindset in addressing homelessness, that can sort of turn things around? Or do you feel like it's sort of irretrievably broken in terms of like the political approach that we're seeing now?
That's a great question. I don't think that they have the right approach yet, but I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged. I'm encouraged that they're having conversations. I'm encouraged that they are making this their number one priority. I'm encouraged that mayors are trying to do more things differently to solve this problem, to change this problem. I'm encouraged. It's not going to happen overnight. We didn't get into this situation overnight. It's taken a number of years and bad decisions and bad policies and lack of making homelessness a priority that's led us to where we are today. But I think that politicians are actually trying to do some things differently, and I'm encouraged by that. I think politicians have put housing first on notice. I think most of them realize that doesn't work. Maybe there's a small percentage out there, 10%, that all you need is housing. Like, you're healthy enough to accept the responsibility of housing. But for everybody else, it's more systematic. It's more comprehensive. It's more therapeutic. There's something deeper going on there. We as an organization, even though we don't take any government funding, we have been intentional about connecting with elected officials. We did a mayor symposium last month and had 14 cities represented. And I asked them to sign a declaration. I asked them to sign a declaration to think more regionally about this issue. One of the other problems I see with our approach is that our electeds are elected to think locally. And if you're elected in a city, then your concern is about your city. But if you're homeless, where are you from? Well, you're all our problem. You are the problem for all of us. You may find yourself in Oceanside today and Vista tomorrow and San Marcos the next day. You can't just keep moving you around from city to city. We need our elected officials to begin to think more regionally about this issue. So on September 18th, down at Petco Park, I've got a little task force with Mayor Franklin from Vista, Mayor Bailey from Coronado, Mayor Wells from El Cajon, Mayor Morrison from National City, and Deputy Mayor Kine from Oceanside. And 3 cities that are really important to us because that's where we have our navigation centers, Oceanside, National City, and then hopefully the third one will be in El Cajon. We have them meeting for a half a day to talk about how to think more regionally about this issue, how to encourage police enforcement from the local police departments and from the sheriff's department. And we will report back to the rest of the mayors because that was our assignment. Now that we've signed this declaration that we want to be more regional about this approach, how do we do that? And we're going to meet and spend a half a day talking about these are some of the things that we need to do in order to think more regionally about this issue. So I'm encouraged.
Sure. Now, one question I want to ask you, sort of as we're wrapping up, is like, do you like homelessness as a national issue? It's so acute. I mean, it's noticeable. Like, for instance, I was traveling in Europe recently, and it's not the same like approach. You don't see people on the streets like you do here. Like, is in terms of like sort of Western advanced nation states, like, do you feel like as a culture we struggle with homelessness differently than other societies? Do you feel like sort of this is a cultural issue to some extent, or do you feel like we're no different than anybody else?
Well, I think there are certainly some other countries. I've been to a few of those countries too. They don't seem to have as big an issue with homelessness. I've been to Spain. I've been to England. I've been to Italy. They don't seem to have as big an issue. You still see homelessness, but it doesn't seem to be as chronic, doesn't seem to be as widespread.
So, what is that?
I don't see any tent encampments, like a whole street full of tents or a park full of tents. And I'm not sure why, other than that they just have a different approach, that their policies back up that you don't get to sleep on the streets, that their services back up that you don't get to sleep on the streets, that the way that the government dollars flow around that issue support that you don't get to sleep on the streets. And so I don't
more
think,
of like a safety net, you think, in society?
I think so, yeah. We are so self-focused in this country that the way we used to be 50, 60 years ago, I think that, we were much more likely to help. And now we're just all, seems like just trying to get by. And we don't notice the person in need as much. And I think they've protected those values in other countries. I love Spain for that reason. My son's been playing basketball over in Spain for the past 9 years, so I get over there once a year. And I love their value of family, and I love their value of pace. And that's something that they have seemed to protect at all these years as they've grown as a country. Not here, man. You can burn up in this country. You get to going so fast.
Sure.
And I think that type of culture and that type of ethics has led to some of the problems that we have today.
As we close, like for people who feel like this is just this is really like an overwhelming issue. I mean, when you see the visibility of homelessness in San Diego, it can be overwhelming. It can really break your spirit. But for one person like listening to this out there, like one of our viewers, like if they want to know how can they get involved, how can they make a difference, like what can they do differently that will tangibly impact homelessness in San Diego? Like, where would you start?
Well, come join the Army. We're building an army of people that care about this issue and want to make this their number one cause, and we need that. There's opportunities to volunteer. I had 256 volunteers last week alone that did something, served meals, mopped hallways, made beds, served as chaplains, did the shower trailer outreach. We had 256 volunteers last week alone. There's opportunities to give financially. We don't take government funding, so we're in the middle of a $25 million capital campaign to fund our expansion plans, because we're going to build a system that we think other organizations can replicate, because it is about rehab. And until we all see the impact of rehab ultimately changing the state of homelessness, we're going to just keep doing what we've been doing. And clearly that's not working. So you can give financially, you can give of your time, you can pray, and you can learn about all of those at sdrescue.org. You can go to our website. It's been newly designed over these last couple of years. You can click on volunteer, you can click on give, and you can find a whole list of ways that you can participate in this issue if this is something that's near and dear to your heart.
Yeah. What are some of the things you recommend for people who are already maybe sort of paying attention to this issue, people who are already sort of plugged in? Like, is there a specific program that you recommend getting involved in?
The shower trailer.
Yeah.
That's probably the easiest entry point. We also do, and we do that just about every day in South County. We do that just about every day in North County. So just go on our website, click on the shower trailer North County, shower trailer South County, and you can sign up and come and participate in helping to give people showers on a particular day during the week. We also do 2 outreach meals that are coming up this fall. One around Thanksgiving. We'll serve about 1,200 meals. And one at Christmas. You can sign up and come down and serve meals. We feed the public. We go back to our roots on those days, and we open our doors and we feed the public. And it is an incredible opportunity to encourage somebody that's currently living on the streets.
Yeah. I really love this interview because I love, that you're a man of conviction, that you're a man of faith, that you really put your money where your mouth is. And I think that the unique approach is like so interesting, just what you guys are doing differently in terms of the rehabilitative approach, not focused as much on the political causes, but more focused on, reaching people's hearts. I think that's so powerful and so important. So really thank you, Donnie, for coming on today.
Thank you.
Appreciate your time.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's do it again soon. Let's make it happen.
I'd like that.
All right.
Thank you.
That's a wrap. This has been another recorded episode of Stay Classy San Diego with your host, Steve Wire. Thanks again to our sponsor, MaxLux Media at maxluxmedia.com. And thanks to all of our listeners for tuning to the show. See you next time. Stay classy, San Diego.